There we go, Ben. Fundamental question from Emma.
Yeah, love it, love it. Okay, so let's talk about the behavioral economics that are at play here. So we're talking about loss aversion. Now we know in loss aversion it's two times greater. So the emotional and decisioning is two times greater to let go of a potential gain or loss as opposed it is to basically doing something. So in potentially Emma's partner's mind, there's potentially a loss aversion going on here because I really don't know what's going to happen. So that's step number one. In terms of action points, number one, here's the first thing you need to do. You need to validate that 640,000. What if you get a professional valuer who actually says, I disagree? My professional opinion on that as a captain who's done this a lot is telling me that it's actually about 560,000 versus 640,000. All of a sudden now the dynamics shift in terms of what it's worth. So if the friend says it's worth that, what sort of validation, what supporting evidence is going to take shape here? Because my next message here is really around one of the things with off the plan properties is it's not a profit yet. Okay, so understand that it's what's different about that versus existing property is you might have a so-called paper profit that does look good, but you can't lend against that paper profit. So there's an opportunity cost problem going on here, and that is that if I've got to wait another 18 months or the end of next year to get access to that property, I can't then release that equity until that time. So I've got a trade-off or a judgment call that I need to make here. So I want that to be really well known. Whereas if we had have gone for a existing property investment grade and it moved that quickly, we would be able to lend against that equity that we've just created to potentially add, like Emma has, who's now got two properties and her new fella has only got one coming, and so that's that opportunity cost thing. I want to now talk about the risk that we're talking about here. So the other action point is, yep, you need to make contact with the council, and so because this developer is delayed for whatever reason, what else is in the pipeline? What other applications for additional supply of accommodation has been put forward for council approval or has been approved? Because remember, supply is the enemy of capital growth. I'll say it again. Supply is the enemy of capital growth. So if there is an additional amount of supply, and let's say another development company can come in and build far quicker than the company that's currently delayed, have a look at the specs on those properties. And is it specced up to the same quality and standard as the one that you've bought? Is it a little bit lower, whatever that may look like? Because at the end of the day, there's not a lot of specs that you can do to a two-bedroom apartment. You can do, stone bench tops these days now. The certain stone you can't use. Because of health reasons. So there's a lot of different things, but there really can't be too much, what are the other amenities that you're going to be paying for as an investor? Is there pool, spas, tennis courts, and all of that other sort of stuff, gymnasiums? All of those come at a cost. So I think it's just important to understand all those types of things. So you can see by the flavour of my response here, I'm skeptical of whether that profit is going to be realised as it currently stands. But if you can tick off on there's no further supply coming, you can tick off on the idea that the economy is going to be in okay shape, and interest rates are potentially going to be coming down, and you want to see it out, well then you're just literally in the hands of the gods around what value you're going to get when when the property's finally complete. And if you move into it, we don't know 100% whether it's owner occupied because it does say move in versus investment. And if you are going to sell that property, but it's your principal place of residence, obviously we know there's no capital gains. But if it's an investment property, I want you to also find out from your tax accountant whether the date of the contract of sale represents significant, because you don't own an asset really. It's really a bit of air at the moment. It hasn't been built yet. So whether that impacts on your 50% capital gains exemption is another point. And I've got one final point there. You could potentially on sell. Let's say you don't get the the deposit back. You could potentially on sell your off the plan. So selling an off the plan again. but I want you to get legal advice on that. So there's a lot of homework to do here. And remember, a fully informed person is always going to make a better decision around that. So get some of that professional advice. Go and seek, go and talk to your captains in that particular area, and hopefully that will give you some idea in terms of making a decision more professionally judged as opposed to a whim or a rough idea in terms of what's going to happen, because we're trying to mitigate the regret that's going to occur either way in the decision that you finally make. Bryce.
Emma, there's this show on telly that my kids are obsessed with at the moment, and it's called Tipping Point. And basically, what they do is they get a coin, Ben, and they throw it down. Are you familiar with Tipping
Yeah, I'm
Point?
familiar with it. Yeah.
So for those who aren't, they've got this coin, they drop a coin into this machine and it drops down onto a platform. And you just imagine this platform's it's rolling in, it's rolling out. So the coin lands on the platform as it rolls out. And as it sort of compresses back in, Ben, the idea is that it pushes the coins forward so that it goes to the platform below, which is moving in and out, in and out. And then as those coins drop, they compress against the wall, and hopefully the goal is to get the coins to fall into the bucket, and for every coin you get $100. So over the journey, this half an hour show, it normally leads into the news. The kids watch it on replay on 7play, I'm pretty sure it is, Ben. What the whole goal of the game is to get one coin which has got a big red star on it. And if you can get that big red star into your tray, game over. You've just won 20,000. That's the aim of the game. Now, here's what they do at the end, Ben. You know this because you know the program. But what happens is someone's chasing $20,000, but they might have only accumulated $6,400, Ben. And they can see that this coin with the big star on it, it's probably still tantalizingly within reach. So what the host does, which is Todd Woodbridge, the half of the famous doubles duo that won every single Wimbledon doubles back in the 90s.
The Woodies, yep.
The Woodies. He entices the person to say, all right, well, if I was to give you 3 more coins, would you go ahead? And they go, oh, no. All right, what if I give you 4? Eventually, it's usually up to 5, and then they throw in a holiday to Mauritius. And it just becomes this, bird in the hand versus, 2 in the bush. This is effectively the game that Emma's partner is playing, a bird in the hand versus 2 in the bush. And which call should I make? Because generally speaking, the odds are that you probably should take your 6,400 and go home. You came with nothing, and the chances of that big red starred coin dropping is probably very, very slim, which is why they're throwing stuff at you. And I get that this is the dilemma that this person is facing right now. Ben, should I go for the big red coin, or should I take my $6,400 now? Now, this is just a fundamental thing for our community, why off-the-plan purchases are taking all the risk. Because here's the deal. You're buying something that a developer could press a button and shrink everything by 15%. They could do lots of delays. It's costing you money. But here's the thing. It's very rare for a developer to build a block of apartments before they sell it. It's rare. It happens a few times, but it's very rare, because what happens is the bank says, in order for me to lend you money to build this concept out of the ground, I want some security across the loans. So the way that we get security across those loans is we pre-sell properties so that we can use that as security to secure the finance for you. So what happens is they pre-sell usually a benchmark minimum, and then they'll leave a few towards the end of the project so they can get their profit, right? Now, the off-the-plan purchaser is helping the developer. They're working together, Ben. They're working in a symbiotic relationship where the developer couldn't build without the buyer, and so the buyer needs to commit for the builder to get going. But what happens is the cycle of greed can kick in. Because what happens is when the developer is anxious, when the concept is coming out of the ground and they're trying to get pre-sales and they're trying to convince the financer to lend them the money, they don't know what's going to happen. But then as the project progresses and they start to see cranes and towers and everything coming out and the market moves, the developer starts to go, I'm missing out on a bit of profit that I could have had if I could have funded this myself and waited to the very end. So for me, the key that's being offered here, Ben, that gives the most clues to me in reading this question is that the developer is offering the deposit back. To me, that is rare. To me, that indicates that the developer is trying to actually say, hey, look, we'll take the pain away from you. We'll give you your money back, because they've now secured funding. They've secured confidence from the bank. They've now secured that they can finish the project. And so we can give you, the foundational member of this project, the person who the future of this project relied upon. We could not have actually got it out of the ground unless you came to the party. We're now saying to you, white flag, you can have your money back. To me, that's a red flag, man, because what it says to me is go and check the sunset clause. We've talked about this before on the
Mm,
podcast. I personally have been involved as a project marketer in my past life where we pre-sold townhouses in a suburb called Aspley in Brisbane's north, where the delays were being spoken about to our clients by saying, but look at the growth you're locking in. Look at the growth you're locking in. You paid this price. When it finally settles, as a panacea for the pain of being able to wait so long. But Ben, I was a captain who hadn't been through those waves before when that happened, right? So what I didn't know, was blind to me, is on the day after the sunset clause kicked in, the developer rescinded the contracts, gave the deposits back to the buyers, and said, thank you for being my foundational pillar that got me to this point, but I no longer need you. And now I'm actually going to put it back on the market and sell it for a higher margin. So that potential profit that the person makes now gets picked out of your pocket, and it gets put back into the developer's pocket. So I'm not saying that this is happening in this case, but I am smelling
mm.
where there's smoke, there's fire. And so the key point is where the developer is offering to give you your deposit back. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, that is of nervous energy for me. So that is why, Ben, this is a living, working illustration of why the foundational pillar of this podcast is to play in the established property lane and leave the risk and the uncertainty and the anxiety and all the changes and all the stuff that comes with off the plan. Leave that for other investors, because we're not doing that.
There's lots of headache and stress in that, Bryce, because if I can double click on your point, I mentioned earlier about on selling it. Now, so the developer is sort of saying, we'll give you a deposit back. But if I go there, so well, you got further demand and you can now sell it at a higher price point. You go back to the marketeers who sold the property. They don't want to resell it at the higher price point. There's no comms in it for them. They're getting a big commission on the original sale. And so they will say, oh, no, we couldn't find a buyer for you. So, what are you going to do? Just take your deposit back. The moment they get it back and they sell it at that higher price point, they get a bigger comms. So yeah, it's that's why you're not in control. And so we always, from an investment point of view, you do pay a premium for being in control, but that's why we also like to buy house and land where we've got an existing property, or when we're buying into an apartment block or town, we want to make sure that the strata's not too controlling against us, or very small blocks of apartments is part of what we're talking about here, because anyone who gains control over a site of land should be paying a premium for that. Like ultimately, that's the whole idea. Once you get that control, it's like in business. You might have a valuation methodology for a group of shareholders, but if someone wants to take controlling interest on that business, they will pay a market premium for that. And there's a reason for that, because obviously it's a strategic investment or whatever they're doing. So the same applies here in terms of what you're trying to do. So it is a difficult one. I wouldn't want to be in Emma's partner's situation because I know that it's going to be a tough call either way. But ultimately, that's the situation they find themselves in, because they can't control the developer, they can't control the builder in terms of when they're going to start. And so it's ultimately a very, very difficult one, because there's opportunity cost, there's a time cost associated with this, and that's what's making it difficult.
So, Emma, hopefully that gives you some discussion points for you and your partner. We don't know the answer. We don't know. Should he stay, or should he get his deposit? The answer, we don't know. But hopefully, because ultimately, if he can get to the end and settle on the property and bank that profit, and you said here at the beginning of the question that he wants to move into it, so he might have had ambition for it to be principal place of residence. So there's a bunch of other stuff going on here, right? But I reckon have a re-listen to what Ben said around, is it the
Be
potential
informed. Yeah.
for the supply side of it, and is it still stack up? And then just ponder what I said around a lived experience. And I've seen sunset clauses enacted a number of times across the journey. So because you might be dealing with a developer who's not going to do that, and so again, we don't know, but at least you can go in your eyes wide open. Because the fundamental question here is: do you get your deposit back, or do you wait for growth? You need to have a sense of whether you feel that growth will still be there at the 2 years, or whether. But the first port of call is go back to the contract, work out when the sunset clause is, and if that sunset clause is under the 2 years that they've talked about, I reckon where there's smoke, there's fire. Good question. Thank you for that.